Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Iman Mash. I'm the clinic director for Osher Center, and we're very happy to have you all here. Welcome. A little bit about the event. The event has been sponsored by Dr. Emily Wong and Cha Chi Ming Funds at the University of Washington. Dr. Emily Wong is an internist. She used to work at the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of Washington, and she moved to Hong Kong about 5 years ago, and she has her practice there. She's extremely busy. She sent her regards and apologies that she couldn't attend this year. She attended last year. Cha Chi Ming was Emily's grandfather, living in Hong Kong. They had this passion for integrative medicine. And in honor of her grandfather, Emily started the fund of Cha Chi Ming at the University of Washington. The goal of this fund is to promote education and training in integrative medicine, and I have the honor of overseeing this fund. So thanks to Emily and her work and her passion and her family for being so supportive of integrative medicine. As I mentioned, I am the clinic director of the Osher Center, and I'm a physician. I'm a family doc by training, and I'm also a licensed acupuncturist. My practice at the University of Washington at Ballard Clinic is integrative medicine, and at Factoria I do integrative medicine / acupuncture in primary care. So again, thank you very much for joining us. The next speaker would be Lou Marchand. She's the executive director of Osher Center, and she will give you a brief report about the activities of Osher Center in the past year. Thank you.
No, thank you all for being here. So our speaker is somebody I'm quite fond of and who's done incredible work that has really affected my thinking about integrative medicine and just holism in general and humanism. So I'm going to read a little bit from David's website because he sort of describes himself in much better language than I could probably come up with. So it's very brief. It was said, this is David speaking, it was said of Thoreau that a poet's noblest work is his life. And David Kopacz ascribes to this philosophy that any work is life's work and should be entered into with one's whole being. Currently, he works as a psychiatrist in primary care mental health integration at the Seattle Division of Puget Sound VA and is an assistant professor at the University of Washington. He also holds a teaching position as a whole health education champion through the National VA Office of Patient-Centered Care and Cultural Transformation. The VA has been an incredible leader in integrative medicine. David's experience ranges from running a holistic private psychiatry practice in Champaign, Illinois, to working as clinical director of a psychiatric rehabilitation center in Auckland, New Zealand. And he will talk a little bit more about his concepts about healing and bringing together what is separated, whether it's within the self or the selves of clients, between people, and within organization. He is an artist, poet, painter, photographer, amazing writer, lover of animals and nature, psychiatrist, holistic and integrative medicine physician, healer, leader, creator, organizer, gatherer, collaborator. He's not exaggerating either. And he brings a wonderful sense of humor and his creativity and compassion to everything he does. Amen. And his two books that he's written, he's just about to publish a third. His books are on the back table, and after his presentation, you can look at them yourself, and he'd be happy to sign your book if you buy it. And Donna will help with that transaction as well. So it's with great pleasure that I invite David Kopacz up to speak.
Thank you, Lou. This doesn't really, it's on, but it doesn't, can you guys hear it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Let me know if you can't hear it at some point, if my arm gets tired and drifts down a little bit. So, yeah, thank you, Lou and Mom and Donna and Emily, thank you everybody with Osher for this. Cynthia, thanks for coming to the VA and speaking to our group there. Normally I wander around a little bit, but we're recording this, so I've been told I have to stay in this place. So we'll see if I can abide by the rules and stay in this place. Well, let's see. So we're talking about rehumanizing medicine, and I thought, what better way to start that than to put a whole bunch of pictures of human beings, and by human beings I include animals as well, who people have been important to me over the years, and I'll talk about some of them as we go through today. So to start with, though, I just wanted to recognize where we are, the land that we're standing on. This land was originally, before colonization, it was Duwamish land and Puget Sound Salish. And you can learn a lot about the land. If you don't know much about this, I've lived here 6 years. If you don't know much about this area, there's a couple good books. Called Thursh's book, Native Seattle, and a new book on Chief Seattle. This website is really good, Native Land. You can go there, you can put in any city in the world, and it will say who were the original indigenous people there. So like all the colonized places like New Zealand, Australia, Americas, you can find out. So that's a good site to look at. And I also want to mention too, the Duwamish, the Longhouse. There's a cultural center in Longhouse that you can go and visit to learn directly from the Duwamish people. So where I grew up, when Mary Pat, my wife, and I, we lived in New Zealand. In New Zealand, you wouldn't say, "Hi, I'm David Kopacz, and I'm a psychiatrist," and blah, blah, blah. You would say, my mom was this person, my dad was this person, my mountain was here, my river was here. And then you'd kind of talk about all your ancestors till you had a common ancestor, and then you'd say, oh, okay, we're related somehow. So I've taken a little bit of that, of like, my mountain is High Point Road in Yorkville, Illinois, where I lived for 4 years. It wasn't really a mountain, but it was the highest point in Kendall County, and it was the closest thing I could come to as a mountain. My river was a tributary, it wasn't even the Wabansie Creek, it was a tributary of the Wabansie Creek that poured into the Fox River in Oswego. So that's kind of where I grew up after 4 years in Yorkville. Then I went down to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, for undergraduate. That's where I met my wife, Mary Pat Traxler. And then we went up to Chicago for 8 years in Chicago. We went to Omaha, Nebraska for a couple years, and back to Champaign, to New Zealand, and then to Seattle. So it's kind of the sort of places I've been. Sounds like a Dr. Seuss book a little bit. You might think that's what it is after I'm done. So let's start with my story. Let's start with a human being. How I got to be where I am. I've been incredibly lucky. The things that I wanted to do, I've been able to do, even though they're unlikely things for a physician to do these days. But like a lot of stories, it starts in kind of a dark place. So this is my desk in college, in my dorm room in Allen Hall in Champaign-Urbana. Mary Pat took the picture of me sitting across the desk. And my freshman year, I wanted to be an astronomical aeronautical engineer and design spacecraft for NASA, which didn't last that long because I failed my first of 8 calculus classes. And I was on academic probation. So, neither my mom nor dad, my dad never went to college, my mom went to college and dropped out after a year or two. So I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna fail out of college. I'm on academic probation. I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know what I want to do. I shot for the stars and I missed. So I would sit there and I'd just sort of stare. I'd stare out the window at Midwestern winter. I'd stare at my bookshelf, and eventually I had this kind of insight. I said, maybe if I look at what I'm interested in, I'll know what I should do with my life. So I just started, I was staring through the wall, and then I brought my stare to like the spines of my books on the shelf. And the first book I pulled off was Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of Soul. Has anyone read that? Ah, good. Somebody's read it. Excellent. So I trained myself to read Jung with that book in high school. I'd read 5 pages a night before I'd read my science fiction books. But I trained myself to read Jung, and then I pulled that off, and I was like, wow, he does all this cool stuff. You know, he meets with a Native American elder in Taos Pueblo. He travels around the world. He goes to Africa. He goes to India. He studies mythology. He studies alchemy. He studies, you know, the chakra system. He studies all these different things. And it seemed like he could do anything. I was like, this is great. Who is he? Oh, he's a psychiatrist. And then I pulled off the other book, was The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. Who's read this? I expect more people probably. Same one. Oh, you and I should get together and talk, right? Yeah, so a few people. So another psychiatrist, and I'm thinking, man, psychiatrists get to do really cool stuff. You know, Scott Peck was talking about bringing spirituality and personal growth into mental health. And so my entree into medicine was through wanting to be a psychiatrist, knowing that I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And then somehow I did all this stuff here. You know, I got triple board certified in psychiatry, neurology, integrative and holistic medicine, integrative medicine. You know, assistant professor, University of Washington, primary care mental health integration at the VA, and being a national whole health education champion for the Office of Patient-Centered Care and Cultural Transformation, which is a real mouthful, but if you break it down, it's really excellent. It's looking at how do we make the patient the center of care, and how do we transform the culture of medicine. And when I was down in New Zealand, you know, I was working on my book, and the subtitle is A Holistic Framework for Transforming Yourself, Your Practice, and the Culture of Medicine. I was like, wow, this is a really good fit. It fits with what the VA is doing too. So I've been able to do this. I think I've kind of made opportunities sometimes, but I think I've also been open to opportunities. I also have this idea that you sort of invest energy into an idea and it goes dormant, and eventually it might sprout at some point in the future, even if you think you've given up on it and it's no longer part of your life. So before going to medical school, though, I realized I needed to go on some type of a quest. So I went on a wilderness quest, and whenever I go somewhere, I bring along a lot of books. I usually bring along 3 times as many books as I could possibly read, and then I buy books as well, you know, while we're going. But I brought along Chuang Tzu from Taoist work, a book on Zen meditation, a book by Somerset Maugham about a man who goes to India and is a spiritual seeker. Black Elk Sticks. At some point later, I went to Black Elk Peak, which used to be Harney Peak in South Dakota, and climbed up that hill in a kind of pilgrimage. Looking at east-west, sounds louder now. Did it just get louder? And just me? Okay.
It's good.
All right. Better. Oh, thanks. Okay, it's not just me. So east-west psychotherapy integration, and of course carried along Thoreau with me too. And has anyone read all of the complete Thoreau or all of Walden? It gets kind of boring at some point because he talks about how many pounds of nails he brought along and how many boards he bought. But I had a 50-hour bus ride from Chicago to Seattle, and then I went out to the Olympic National Park and spent 2 weeks alone backpacking, because that was my preparation for medical school. I thought I had to get sort of emotionally and spiritually ready to go into medical school. Okay, so here's a few places. I mentioned some of these already. So medical school at U of I Chicago. Rotated through U of I Hospital, Westside VA, which is now Jesse Brown VA, Cook County Hospital, I did a fair amount of work there. Omaha, VA there, PTSD clinic and mental health clinic. I was in multi-specialty group practice for 3 years, and when I left I had a non-compete clause, so I ended up going to rural community psychiatry in Paris, Illinois and Mattoon, Illinois for a few years. 5 years into, this was a great thing, this holistic psychiatry practice was really, really fun. And one of these seeds that I think got planted was Mary Pat and I were both psychology majors, and the only class we took together was cross-cultural psychology. And she went to Munich, lived in Munich for a year after graduating from undergrad. And I always thought, well, I'll get my MD first, and then maybe I'll travel and go abroad somewhere. And it just didn't happen. And at some point, though, this thing opened up in our life, and we went down to New Zealand. So we were down in New Zealand for 3.5 years, and there I worked in community mental health and assertive community outreach, and I got to be clinical director of this amazing program, Buchanan Rehabilitation Center. It was a psychiatric rehabilitation program that's really kind of like a holistic program of looking at how can we help people regain lost functioning. We did literacy training. We had people who trained them how to cook. It was like we had a therapeutic gardener and a series of independent living flats where people could go and practice cooking, practice housekeeping. We teach people how to take the bus and public transportation, as well as provide psychiatric care and personal growth support. And we started a yoga class there for the clients, and I also ran a spirituality and philosophy discussion group for psychotic patients, which was pretty fun. They tell you you're not supposed to do that, but everybody enjoyed it. So, I guess maybe they'd say you got to be psychotic to do something like that. So I just wanted to mention a few mentors, and we don't have a clock, and I forgot my watch, so I'll keep my phone out here. Okay. So I want to mention a few of my mentors. So starting from top right, and we'll go clockwise. Deb Clayman, one of my first mentors in medical school. I was her student assistant on a project she was doing on post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms in relationship to internship year of medical training. And so very interesting. I got primed right off the bat that what we're doing, our learning, can be harmful. There's side effects to everything we do with medications. Our educational system has side effects as well, and our practice system has side effects as well. Bob Maloki. So my third year of medical school, first week of July, third year medical school. Anyone who's done medical training knows that's when they unleash all the green medical students onto the wards. And so I'm in my bright, shiny, white short coat, stuffed with all sorts of books and tools and instruments. And it was kind of like a Three Stooges comic thing, like if you ever bent over to pick something up, everything would fall out, and just flustered and lost all the time. And so Bob comes up to me and says, "So, new medical student, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, how do you know?" He's like, "Do you feel disoriented? Do you feel scared? Do you feel, lost?" And I was like, "Yeah, how do you know?" And he's just like, "Bob Maloki. Nice to meet you." And he walked off. And he would just do these sort of like drive-by teachings. The thing he would do, he could carry on like 5 conversations at the same time. We'd be talking about like Jerzy Kosinski's novels and, Stephen Crane's poetry and hematologic conditions that cause psychiatric symptoms. And we'd be talking about all these things. He'd ask a question, and I'd give him an answer. And he'd say, "You misunderstood me. You were answering this question." And he'd make up a question that my answer was correct for, and then he would answer the question again, and then I'd try again, and he'd say, no, sorry, that was this question. So I'd learn like 5 things. By the time I kind of got it, I'd learn all these other associated things around it. So he's a great, great teacher. Hyman Muslin was one of our last psychoanalysts. Psychoanalysts were dying off during my time in psychiatric training. And he was this great hep cat, jazz drummer. Knew of people who knew like Miles Davis and Bill Evans. He was a self-psychologist, studied with Kohut. And he would say, he taught our psychiatry and literature class. He taught psychotherapy to us. And he would say, "You're not in a psychiatric training program. Don't let them tell you that. Training is for dogs. You're in a psychiatric education program as a human being to learn how to work with other human beings." So he hated that word, training. Steve Wine, when I met him, I was really impressed with him. He was a human rights psychiatrist. He worked with Bosnian refugees. He brought in Bosnian writers and who would come and talk to us about their novels, about their time in Bosnia. Medical students who had been promoted in the ranks of the war from like a first-year medical student to somebody independently doing surgeries by the end of the war, and then they had to come back and start again as a medical student in the States. He was a scholar. He encouraged me to write kind of like my sort of thesis, it wasn't a thesis, but like kind of my crowning, residency paper for this research elective in trauma and psychotherapy on Jerzy Kosinski and Louis Ferdinand Céline's works on trauma and brutality. And so he let me do this. He was able to open my eyes that psychiatry didn't have to be all about medications and medication trials. that it could be about the human dignity of people and war survivors, and that it could be about arts and literature. And Dr. Muslin too, we talk about Shakespeare and read all of these different plays, all sorts of things, and he'd walk us through them. So I'm not going to go through all of these mentors because in interest of time, but I did. Lou, I put you up here. Did Lou step out?
I hate that picture.
Oh, well, don't put it on the internet. I have like several pictures on the internet, and that's the one that I found. So Lou's helping us out. She hates that picture. I want to mention Steve Hunt over here, who's in the audience. Steve, can you raise your hand there and wave over everybody? So Steve is one of my greatest mentors here, and I have the great luck to meet with him about once a month. He and I meet. He is the national co-director of the Post-Deployment Integrative Care Initiative for the VA. Developed that where veterans returning from war could meet with a social worker, a mental health person, and a primary care doctor all in the same visit, their first visit to the VA, and has worked to have that throughout the VA. Also, he's very much involved in pain care. He's our occupational medicine doctor. He does our Agent Orange screenings and burn pit registry and all those things. He's an all-around great guy. And next year, he's going to be presenting his book. Is that next year? 2 years. I'm harassing Steve to write a book. And I've resorted to public humiliation. So, okay, sorry, Steve. I said I wasn't going to bother you about the book anymore, but it's going to be a great book, I promise. Okay, and some other great folks that I'm sorry I won't go into all the folks here. So we went down under to New Zealand, and this is New Zealand summer. Yeah, it's New Zealand summer, but it's Christmas. Our Christmas time is summer because it's in the southern hemisphere. So this was looking out from our house. We had this fountain and this great mountain, Rangitoto, the dormant volcano back there. This is a kiwi. You got Santa Claus in shorts, and you got the Barbie and the picnic blanket and everything. So we really knew we weren't in Kansas anymore when Christmas came around. We were just like, what is going on here? One of my favorite places, Muriwai Beach, Black Sand Beach on the west coast of the North Island. And when I left, one of my patients did this drawing of, Ranganui and Papa Tuanuku, who are the Sky Father and Earth Mother, and then Maui, the cultural hero Maui, bringing the sun in for the people, so there's light during the day is one of these cultural stories. So I was really touched when I left, that did be given this artwork. New Zealand, 15% of the population in New Zealand is indigenous Maori. If you work in New Zealand, you have to go through cultural sensitivity training rather than the Maori people having to kind of subsume themselves in the mainstream medical system. The mainstream medical system is supposed to embrace their culture and to provide culturally sensitive care. So Sir Mason Dury is a Maori psychiatrist. He developed what they call the Whare Tapa Wha model, a four-sided house model of a cultural approach to Maori health. And so these are Taha Tinana, physical health, Taha Wairua, spiritual health, Taha Whanau, which is family and community health, and Taha Hingaro, which is mental and emotional health. So I learned this, as part of my practice in New Zealand, and Auckland's a very diverse city. 40% of the people living in Auckland were born in another country. So not just Maori, but all Polynesian, Samoan, Fijian, Indian, South African, people from all over the world. Sometimes I'd be in a meeting with people, and I'd look around, and there were fewer Kiwis, New Zealanders, in the room than there were, it's like a United Nations of mental health. It was amazing. It was one of the things that I just loved the most, was just the diversity of cultures there. So what I learned, though, with this is indigenous medicine is holistic medicine, and holistic medicine is human medicine. So I noticed this convergence. I thought really holistic medicine, integrative medicine, is this sort of Western thing that we're kind of thinking about and trying to bring into medicine. But it really is ancient. We're really kind of rediscovering it. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little bit of reading. This will be a challenge here because I'm going to read from this book and hold the microphone at the same time. So I'm going to do a few readings because as I was thinking about how can I summarize some of these key points, I thought, still this book from 2014, I think it still really captures a lot of the things that I was trying to figure out and understand. I wrote this book because I was trying to figure out what is holistic medicine. And essentially I realized it is a state of being, it's an interrelationship between people, it's a paradigm of existence. It's not acupuncture or yoga or Tai Chi or giving an herb or something. It's not, those are techniques. And the techniques can be part of holistic medicine, but you could also be like Bob Malocki, a hem-onc doctor, and he was a holistic doctor because he met the whole person. You know, he read literature. He drew on things more than just science. He used science, but he also drew on the humanities. And he drew on himself as a whole person to interact and meet the whole person of the patient or client. Okay, so let me see, I'll read you this. I put the whole thing up. I know it's kind of small print, but I'm going to read all that to you, so don't worry if you can't see it. So dehumanization in contemporary medicine. So this book takes on the task of rehumanizing medicine. We start by recognizing that there's a problem with how medicine is currently practiced. It dehumanizes staff and clients, creating dissatisfaction, suffering, poor performance, and medical errors. Dehumanization is an iatrogenic effect of the dominant paradigms in contemporary medicine. Like Lou was talking about, you know, I talk about these these different models of medicine that Jerry Arbuckle, the anthropologist and Catholic priest, found when he was working in healthcare reform, that there's an economic rationalist model, that's basically a business model of medicine. There's a biomedical reductionist model, which is kind of the science model of medicine. There's a foundational model, which is the, he was talking about sort of the faith-based organizations who were humanitarian and would care for the poor and all that era where hospitals were all named, you know, after different denominations like Presbyterian or things like that. And then there's the traditional model, which is the indigenous model of medicine. And so Jerry Arbuckle said there's these 4 or more competing models or cultures interacting within medicine. And that's why it doesn't make sense sometimes when people are talking to each other because they're coming from different models or paradigms or worldviews. So let's see where I was here. So the economic business model and reductionist and materialistic approach to biomedicine. That those contribute to dehumanization because they're objectifying. They deal in numbers. They reduce everything to numbers. And objectification is like dehumanization. We're proud about being objective in science, also in branches of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, pride themselves in being a blank slate or being objective, but being objective is dehumanizing. You might need to do it to be a technician at different times, but if that's all you can be, then you're contributing to dehumanization in medicine. So in the day-to-day practice of medicine, doctors are expected to see more patients in less time and to efficiently reduce people to symptoms, diagnostic codes, prescriptions, procedures, and billing codes. This leaves little time or space for people, physician, or patient. Future doctors are attracted to medicine for idealistic and humanitarian reasons, but through training, they often lose this idealism, and we know there's studies that support that. So how can we preserve idealism and humanitarianism in medicine? So this is a question I feel like I've been working on this all my life, consciously and unconsciously. Practicing physicians have high rates of burnout and job satisfaction. How can we reinvigorate the practice of medicine and make it sustainable? Yeah, there we are at the bottom of that slide. So I have a few slides with some quotes here, and then we'll get into more pictures and fun stuff. So this is something I realized just recently at the, it was at the Wounded Healer conference that Lou put on, the Rishi Remen organization. And I had this realization, people aren't numbers. You know, that's really the fundamental thing. We train people in medicine, the sciences, in numbers. And when I say medicine, I'm sorry, as a doctor, sometimes I say medicine, and I'm not just meaning physicians, you know, I really mean all of healthcare, medicine in the broadest sense. You know, I work with a Native American guy named Joseph Rael, and in his culture they talk about medicine as sort of the healing power, sort of like a mana in Polynesian culture, the mana. So when I say medicine, I don't just mean, you know, doctors, I mean the broad scope of healing endeavors. So most medicine's taught with numbers, but there's an older medicine, the realm of healing. and the realm of wisdom, which is beyond numbers. And it's this kind of medicine that's so sorely needed when up to 50% of physicians report burnout. We need a counter-curriculum of rehumanization and a compassion revolution to reach this medicine without numbers. And these are two terms that I develop in my book, the counter-curriculum and the compassion revolution. Okay, so here we go, counter-curriculum. So in medical school, I realized that I had to engage in a parallel education process in addition to the standard scientific curriculum. We could even call this a counter-curriculum focusing on rehumanization. At times, I found teachers, mentors, and fellow students who practiced this counter-curriculum, but often I had to seek it out on my own in order to balance my education. This book and this talk is about that counter-curriculum of rehumanization. Science and evidence-based interventions are one paradigm of medicine, but as human beings working with human beings, we must have a human framework as well as a scientific one. To rehumanize medicine, the people who work in medicine must be well-rounded, well-developed human beings, as well as safe and effective technicians. I was just at the Humanities and Medicine Symposium for Mayo Clinic in Arizona, at the Arizona campus last week, and I met Lauren Barron, who's the head of a medical humanities undergraduate major program. They have 250 students. Their major is medical humanities. And her talk was called, Day one is too late. Day one of medical school is too late to make a good doctor. And she and I got along great. We talked a lot and had a lot of similarities. So this idea of medical humanities is one of the things that's part of this compassion revolution, I would say, or counter-curriculum, that's trying to counterbalance and remind us we're more than numbers, more than technicians, we're human beings, and there's something healing when one human being connects with another human being. So a great deal of time, energy, and money is spent making sure that physicians are good technicians, but are they good human beings? Do we measure that in any way? Are you a better human being after going to medical school, or are you just a better technician? Being a good technician, objective, detached, unaffected by emotion, protocol-driven, can actually interfere with being a good human being, I would argue. Clinicians should not stop being technicians or scientists, but they have a responsibility to attend to their own humanity as well as that of the client. The counter-curriculum provides a holistic framework for being a human being, for working with human beings, and for creating systems that deliver care by human beings to human beings. Apologize all the words here, but we'll get through a couple more of these wordy slides. So this one, so what's a holistic framework? What I thought about is, what's a human being? So if I'm saying we need to be fully human, what does that mean to be fully human? So this holistic framework, it's founded on multiple interacting and mutually influencing subsystems. Scientific medicine and the objective, observable body make up just one dimension of human health. Sometimes the physical dimension is primary, for instance, in physical trauma or surgery. But sometimes other human dimensions are more important. Emotions, mind, love, self-expression, intuition, spirituality, context, and time all play a role in health and illness. And when I say context, I mean relationships, the social world, as well as the physical environment is the context of people. And time, I mean, people develop over time. There's different developmental stages. What's appropriate at one age might not be appropriate at another. So holistic framework is a paradigm for understanding and interacting with human beings. It's a human systems approach and a way of being in the world. Holistic medicine is a philosophy or paradigm for understanding what it is to be human, to suffer, to be ill, to be healthy, what it is to change and grow and live. It helps us understand how disconnection can lead to suffering and how connection can lead to healing. Holistic medicine is not defined by using an herb. In New Zealand you'd say herb, it's actually proper to say, by using an herb instead of a medication, or by any specific technique or intervention. Being a good technician, whether biomedical or natural, because I've been to some chiropractors who are pretty darn reductionist. My worst acupuncture experience was with a chiropractor who kind of forgot me there and then came in after I was like numb from not being able to move, said, no charge for the extra 30 minutes. I was like, I'm not coming back. So you can be a natural technician as well, and that's why the technique doesn't define if you're holistic. You can be a reductionistic chiropractor. So being a good technician, whether biomedical or natural, is part of being a good physician. But being a good physician is more than just being a good technician. There's some sort of logic, any of you have taken logic, there's some sort of logical argument for that. So I'm not going to go into it. It's been too long ago. And then where do we go? Okay, one more paragraph. When you start to connect in different ways, you change the healthcare delivery system in which you work. So this is another fundamental aspect of my book, that the individual, the relational, and the systems levels are all interconnected. When you change at one level, it starts to transform at other levels. That transformation can bring crisis, though, because if the individual changes and the system doesn't change, or if they can't change the way they practice, that transformation will lead to suffering for the individual because they have no outlet of working in a different way. So sometimes I think you do have to change jobs, and I think that's why I've changed jobs so much in different times, where I felt like I outgrew a system I was working in. So what starts as personal dissatisfaction can become personal transformation, which changes systems. Institutions will always drift toward promoting their own interests over human interests. It is the responsibility of health professionals to ensure that they stay human, help their clients stay human, and ensure that healthcare delivery systems promote humanization rather than dehumanization. And then, now this is a slide I like showing to the residents. Does anyone know who kind of coined the idea of lumpers and splitters? Anyone? A guess or a side?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, go ahead. What do you think?
The DSM people are splitters.
Oh, the DSM people are splitters, definitely. That's definitely true. Thank you, I wholly agree. With the DSM, I mean, I always do general diagnoses because I think very few people have a specific, like a full major depressive episode. Most people are kind of this unspecified depression with elements of depression, elements of adjustment disorder, maybe elements of grief. But the way we're kind of trained is that there's all these true forms out there. They call it a categorical approach to mental illness as opposed to a spectrum approach. And I'm much more of somebody who thinks, well, there's this whole spectrum and there's really not that much difference between these different points on the spectrum. So Darwin, from what I've been able to figure out, Charles Darwin came up with this idea of lumpers and splitters. You got two biologists sitting in the Galapagos, and they see two different birds, and it sounds like it's going to be a joke, but it's not going to be funny. It's the best way to get people to laugh. It's not a joke, it's not going to be funny. So the two biologists sitting watching two birds, and the first biologist says, look at those two birds of the same species. And the other biologist says, look at those two birds of different species. The one biologist A, is looking at similarities. Biologist B is saying, oh yeah, but that beak is slightly shorter, the yellow is a little different, and the tail's a little longer. They're two different species. So our education in healthcare professions and medical education is almost wholly a splitter education of how we can break things into, I can't read them on my thing here, but cardiology, neurology, pulmonology, podiatry, all these different things. We've got a doctor for every part of your body, and we forget that every part of your body is connected to every other part of your body. And then we give the general practitioners, we say, well, you're in charge of everything, you know. They're the only people who really kind of look at the whole person, but they're so busy they don't have time to really do whole person care. And you can only see your GP maybe once a year, or 1.2 times a year. I forget what it is. Some of the different systems, they don't want you to get penalized if you see your patients too often as a primary care provider. So what I argue is that holistic medicine, I just can't help but see things this way. And so I think that's part of why I've had struggles in medicine sometimes, is I keep seeing things as interconnected rather than seeing them as divided. And looking at things divided, I want to make sure I make this point that you don't think I'm like an anti-splitter. Being a splitter is great, you know. If you need heart surgery, you want somebody who can forget about everything else and just look at your heart and fix it, you know, work on it. But after heart surgery, you want somebody who's going to sit down and talk with you as a whole person and look at your diet, your nutrition, and your sleep, and your relationships, and all these different things. Okay, so one last big long quote here. So the compassion revolution now. Let's see. compassion revolution. So if you stand up for caring, oh yeah, I love this one. This is the revolution part. This is where doctors of the world unite. So if you stand up for caring, compassion, and the humble service of patients and communities, you are a threat to established and powerful interests. This is Robin Youngson. He's an anesthesiologist whose daughter went through a terrible car crash and was in had a prolonged hospitalization, and he was just appalled at how the healthcare system treated people. So he wrote a book called Time to Care and started an international organization called Hearts in Healthcare. And then my friend Jerry, he wrote this. The role of the paramodern, or we could say refounding leader, somebody who works to, refounding means you work to get back to the initial founding vision of an organization. And he argues that all organizations need to have to be periodically refounded to go back to their roots. So the role of the paramodern leader, or refounding leader, is to foster a subversion of reality that persistently undermines the ordinary. The stark fact is that many healthcare institutions never succeed in reinventing themselves because people lack the courage and imagination to challenge deeply held assumptions about existing strategies and processes, and in the response, to think and act in fundamentally altered ways. So transformation means we act in fundamentally altered ways, but institutions try to have us act in predictable, standardized ways. So Arbuckle and Youngson refer to compassion in healthcare reform as subversion and a threat to established interests. Parker Palmer, who's not one of these quotes, he writes about institutions are a threat to professionalism, that professionalism and institutions are fundamentally in opposition on a lot of different areas. I speak of a compassion revolution and a counter-curriculum. These concepts represent a form of creative resistance in order to rehumanize medicine. I agree with these authors' appraisals that rehumanization is in opposition to the objectifying agenda of the biomedical and economic rationalists' models. It may seem absurd to say promoting compassion and human potential in medicine is revolutionary and may oppose the organizational structure of contemporary medicine. Here. It's possible that organizational structures of contemporary medicine may oppose holistic and compassionate perspectives, particularly if they are at odds with the profits of the economic rationalist model or the objectivity of the biomedical model. So I think that's all of our soapbox things, the philosophical things that set the tone here. And I don't think anyone's drank this water, but I might get cooties, so I'm going to go ahead and drink this water. Now you'll get to see my ventriloquism skills, which I don't have, so no ventriloquism. Okay, so let's see where we are here. Next slide. So a little bit about the compassion revolution. So I mentioned Youngson's books and his organization. The Gold Foundation, anyone familiar with the Gold Foundation? They do a lot of work nationally on humanism and medical humanities and compassion. The Rishi organization, Remen's organization, Parker Palmer's Courage and Renewal runs retreats for physicians that are very good. Closler, I just kind of learned about these guys. It's like a Johns Hopkins thing, getting closer to Osler. And so they promote a lot of kind of self-care and personal growth for physicians and healthcare workers and students. The Mayo Clinic Humanities and Medicine Symposium, this was the 6th annual one. They rotate through their 3 different campuses in Minnesota, Arizona, and Florida. And now a few more, the revolutionary, kind of more revolutionary things. Who's read Eric Topol? Who knows who Eric Topol is? First of all, a couple people, yeah. So he's a physician, he writes for the New Yorker. So he wrote an article recently saying physicians really need to start organizing. They need a professional organization that's going to advocate for them, not advocate for more pay, but advocate for quality of life, advocate for, humane working conditions. A lawyer, if they work long hours, they get paid extra. A physician works long hours, it's kind of expected that you're a professional who's just supposed to work long hours and not ask for more money. So there's kind of this double standard with a lot of professions. Some of it I think, we should have. We shouldn't, kind of bill patients by the minute necessarily. Like we were working on something with some lawyers recently. It's like every 5-minute increment, I think you get billed something. So I don't know if we should get like that extreme, but there is this imbalance where we're just expected to kind of always sacrifice and expected to give more and more and do more and more clerical work with electronic medical records as well. And see more and more patients in more, in quicker time, more efficient, for shorter times. Z-Dog, who knows Z-Dog? Yeah, a couple people, yeah. Have you seen his, it's not burnout, it's moral injury video? So this guy, his name's Yeah, thank you. I was gonna butcher it. So yeah, Z-Dog is easier, I can say, for a lot of people. But he argues that we shouldn't think of burnout as something like we need more time management classes and we need to just meditate. That actually, it's moral injury. It's kind of controversial because moral injury comes from combat veterans who were in a culture that expected them to kill, and then they come back and they're in a culture where they're expected not to kill, and killing is bad. So there's this moral dilemma of how do you make sense of it? But what Z-Dog is arguing, and also Talbot and Dean wrote a more academic article, they say that we are forced to work in conditions that compromise the ideals for why we went into medicine and healthcare. We went into for healing and connection and relationships, and we're in this kind of biomedical protocol and economic system that encourages us to see more and more patients quicker and quicker, rather than, and we're not measured on like real true quality, like in spending 15 more minutes with that patient, did they reveal something very important to you that they said they'd never told someone else before, and now they trust you and will go along with the treatment plan. Those sort of things aren't really measured. So that's more the revolution part. The first part's kind of the compassion part. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here and talk about some different perspectives. So The Hero's Journey, who's familiar with that, by Joseph Campbell? More people with this one, yeah. So I started doing this as a class, a 12-week class for veterans, looking at the transition from military culture to civilian culture. So basically the hero's journey or heroine's journey, you start in the known world, you have a call to adventure, you cross a threshold, you have mentors, challengers, helpers, you have some sort of abyss, like a symbolic, or sometimes in the mythology it's like a real death and rebirth. You have a transformation, and you try to return, cross this threshold and get back to where you started from, but now you're transformed. So I adapted this for veterans. You start here in the civilian world, you get drafted, or you volunteer for the military, you go through boot camp, you have mentors, you have a turning point where you say, this isn't for me anymore, I'm not going to re-up, or you get injured and you can no longer practice or function as a soldier. You have some sort of journey within, like a lot of the military journey is outward, and so we encourage people to also turn inward and look at ways that they changed inwardly as well as outwardly. We look at recovering heart after you learn to participate in order to be able to kill people or to be able to support people to kill people. You have to deaden your heart, and so you need to recover that as part of this return. You have to somehow come to at one with society and go through transformations to return back to the civilian world, transformed, no longer the same as you were. Back in the same place that felt like home, now no longer feels like home. So you're looking for home, and how do you find it? Transition shock, you don't have to read through all these. I just put this up because if you look at this is just from like the Wikipedia page. It's amazing how similar cultural transition shock is to post-traumatic stress disorder. Anger, helplessness, getting stuck, glazed stare, impulsivity, irritability, hostility, mood swings, physiological stress reactions, suicidal or fatalistic thoughts, or withdrawal. And I started thinking, man, what if we're misdiagnosing all these veterans with PTSD and they're just going through a prolonged cultural adjustment? And this is a lot of the work that Steve has been looking at with post-deployment. And Carl Marlantes spoke of this. He's a Rhodes Scholar, Vietnam veteran. He talked about initiations in his book, What It's Like to Go to War. And he said our culture goes through partial initiations, and we undergo them unconsciously and without guidance. And with his training, he said with boot camp, Marine boot camp, there was something crucial that was missing, and that was the spiritual. Somewhere else he said, they taught me how to kill, they didn't teach me how to deal with having killed. So, and this fits really well with this idea. He talks about initiation. This is the three-part initiation that Joseph Campbell talks about and draws on anthropologists and cultural studies folks who look at a separation, an initiation, and a return as the three-part structure of initiation. Emily Wong had put a lot of her art last year, for those of you who were here last year. And so I was going to try and put more of my artwork in her honor, but unfortunately she's not here today. She'll see the video, hopefully. But this is a painting I did. We do a Hero's Journey project at the end of the 12 weeks. I tell the veterans, the last class you teach us what you learned, and do it through some sort of multimedia art form. So we've had people write songs, sing songs, do paintings, drawings, do sculpture. So this is what I made one time. And we move to where I can see this. So this will be a theme in the last part of the talk here, some of the different ways of looking at trauma and suffering as transformation. So rather than a treatment model, we have an initiation that has an intentional or ritual suffering that has elements of symbolic death and rebirth. So initiation is supposed to hurt. So we can tell veterans, you're supposed to feel hurt. You're partway through an initiation, so the pain's okay. Joseph Rael, who we'll talk about in a minute, calls this intentional suffering. So transformational model focuses on all life experiences as potentially transformative, to move through rather than to move away from. A lot of medical treatments help people move away from their symptoms, get rid of anxiety, get rid of insomnia. Instead, a transformational model would say, you're feeling these for some reason, and there's a reason and purpose for you to go through them. We're going to hold the space for you to go through them and see what's on the other side. And then Campbell said that the boon that heals the hero in society is found at the darkest point, in the abyss. And he also says that society is just routinely going to reject those who've gone places that most people don't go. So when veterans come back and say, I feel rejected by society, we say, it sounds like you're in a heroism initiation. You should expect that. So here's Joseph Rael, the beautiful painted arrow. I've been working with him for 5 years now. We've written one book together that's back there, Walking the Medicine Wheel. We're working on our second book, should be coming out soon. On his mom's side, he's Southern Ute, and it's a matriarchal culture, so his tribal affiliation is Southern Ute. On his dad's side, he's Pickery's Pueblo. His mom died when he was young, around 5 years old. He went to live in Pickery's. When he turned 18, they said, you can stay here, but you'll never get a job because you're not Pickery's. You should go back to the Ute Reservation. He went back to the Southern Ute Reservation. They said, you don't belong here. You didn't grow up here. And so he left the reservation. He's done a lot of traveling in his life. He turned this around into he's a world citizen. That's his identity. He's not one thing or another thing. He's a world citizen. Without that rejection, he might not have gotten there. So, kind of looking at becoming a true human, getting back to this idea of humanizing medicine. Joseph has talked about this in some of his books. I'll just read one of these in interest of time. But to become a true human, one must become conscious of listening and hearing the voice of the great mystery. In medicine, we're trying to unravel or unwind the great mystery. We don't want a great mystery, we want the solution. But Joseph is saying to be a true human, we have to listen to the mystery, speaking through everything, through the sound of a tree, or a bird flying overhead, or the wind in the room, or someone breathing, or someone talking, or a moment of silence. So Joseph's taught me about the medicine wheel. It's a circular model, and it reminds me a lot of the hero's journey. It's a circular model of transformation. There's 4 directions, outer directions, north, south, east, west. There's 4 inner directions, mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical. The medicine wheel orients us to different principal ideas about purity and placement, about awareness and innocence. The center of the medicine wheel is the heart, where everything comes together and holds all those elements together. So our 2 books, Walking the Medicine Wheel, and then we just got it translated into Vietnamese, which is really cool. That's what Walking the Medicine Wheel in Vietnamese looks like. So this, very similarly to the hero's journey, this is what I kind of learned from Joseph. PTSD is an enculturation process, moving from a war culture to a peace culture. PTSD is an initiation, giving suffering a place and a meaning, moving from unintentional suffering to intentional suffering. And rather than getting rid of symptoms, viewing symptoms as mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual processes of the medicine wheel, as things that you're supposed to go through, and sometimes it goes back and sometimes it goes forward. But as long as you're on the wheel somewhere, it's okay. Sometimes you're at the top, sometimes you're at the bottom. That's part of being on the wheel, part of being human. And then Joseph also often will say, I am my brother's keeper, to move from other to brother and sister. And this is for veterans. It's a tough thing because they're trained to see others, enemies. There's us and them. And then they come back and they're supposed to blend in. It's supposed to be all of us diverse together. So that's a challenging acculturation. So here's some of my artwork from the book, and Joseph came up with this idea. He got one day, he said, no matter what a person does, or no matter what they've done, there's a held back place of goodness in their heart, and our job is to help them find that again. We'll see where we're at. I should probably be wrapping up pretty soon, so I'm going to skip a couple slides here. Let's just go and then to our next book. We kind of continue this on in a way. It's a little bit more spiritual. We're talking about kind of this spiritual process of looking at initiation and becoming visionaries. These are all things that Joseph has these elements of as a visionary, a mystic, and a shaman. And then he says, though, as a shaman, he says, some people call me a shaman. I don't know about that. I just work here. So if anyone says they're a shaman, they're not a shaman. That's kind of how it goes. You're a hollow bone that healing energy flows through. So part of this, one of the things, and this sort of loops back about medicine, it's not necessarily part of the main aspect of the book. I'm not writing it for healers, I'm writing it for everybody. But then I also say that we're kind of drawing, our first book was for healers, our second book was for warriors, but we're all kind of warriors and healers because we struggle in our lives, and that's what heroes and warriors do, they struggle. And we're all wounded in our struggles, and that means we're all healers, because we're trying to heal ourselves from these wounds. So we're all healers and heroes and warriors in some way. And the process of becoming, of moving toward this, through this initiation, there's these 3 parts of initiation: separation, initiation, return. We can also say there's seeking, you're looking for something. You're finding and receiving it, that's the initiation, where you're like, I found it, I received it. But then you realize that you are a vessel that's holding this, and your job is to overflow and to give it to others. So on a true spiritual path, you start moving away from a sense of separation as a separate ego into a sense of interconnected relationship, and then at deep mystical levels, a sense of oneness, where somebody hurts somebody else and you feel that pain because you have this sense of oneness that's even beyond interconnection. So personal enlightenment leads to social responsibility, and my new thing is medical activism. I met a resident who did a poster on medical activism at the Mayo Humanities and Medicine Symposium, and I thought, somebody needs to write a book on medical activism. All the great stuff that's out there, and to argue this is not something new that's on the side, this is the core of who we are as professionals. With Semmelweis saying we should wash our hands between patients, or when we go from the morgue to deliver a baby. He gets ridiculed. This is a while back. I was part of the Physicians for a National Health Plan when I was a medical student, or Physicians Against Nuclear War. or Physicians Against Gun Violence. You know, these are all core parts of professionalism. They're not add-ons. They're actually core parts of who we are as moral healers and individuals. So through seeking, we are becoming the medicine that we need and that the world needs as well. And I think that feels like a good kind of ending point. Also, we're getting all the buzzing. Joseph says, pay attention to what's going on around you. Adila piaci. Adila piaci is Tiwa for pay attention. And so when we're talking and some noise happens or some seemingly random thing, he's like, see, we're onto something. You heard that, right? That was accentuating what we were talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. I'm happy to talk more. I'm happy to give you my whole slide deck, which has some other hidden secrets in it that we didn't get to. But I welcome any questions now for as long as you all want to stay here. So thank you. Do we have another microphone to kind of work the room, or should I hand this one off to people?
I think we're lucky to have one.
We're lucky to have this one. So we're all going to go into a state of mystical unity and share this one microphone.
But maybe people can speak up.
Okay. Well,
Or you can repeat the question
Yeah.
if someone has a soft voice.
okay. So any comments, questions, rotten fruit or vegetables? Fresh fruit or vegetables. I did accept half a bushel of peaches one time as payment in my private practice for a session for somebody who was down on their luck. Yeah, Dan, good to see you. Thanks for coming too. I haven't seen you in a while.
You commented, I think, about science being reductionistic. Do you think it has to be? I mean, I think maybe it is, but does it really have to be? Can you not do holistic science?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think about that a lot. Because I find myself getting too polemical sometimes, and I feel like I get that way because I'm trying to counter something like we've got such a weight of reductionistic science. I don't think it has to necessarily be reductionistic, but I think our value system only sees reductionistic. We didn't get to this slide. I'll get the slide that says, or did we do it? I can't remember. Human beings are not numbers. So human beings are not numbers. Think about your most meaningful personal interactions with somebody. How much do numbers play a role in that? Think about your peak spiritual personal growth experiences. How much do numbers play a part in that? So I think you could have a kind of science that somehow measures that and values that, as well as looking at numbers and statistics and reducing things down. I think you could have both. I think in the past there might have been that, but I think it's, I think about this in my practice, because I prescribe medicines, the majority of my patients I see are on medications. So I'm prescribing medications, but I feel like it's almost two parts of my brain sometimes. I'm in this person's suffering, they're having nightmares, sweats, they're only sleeping 2 or 3 hours a night, they're really irritable, they're angry, they're going to lose their job. I can give them some prazosin, they stop sweating, they don't have the nightmares as much, their sleep's not as restless, and now we can get on with getting to the more kind of human aspects of things, existentially, what's going on in their life, what's going on spiritually, relationally. So I think it would be possible, and I know a lot of your work, I think, goes in that direction. Yeah, if you want to follow up.
Yeah. I think there's an important distinction between numbers as a part of the therapeutic interaction versus numbers that can be used to measure the effects of that therapeutic interaction.
Yeah.
In the latter case, I don't think there's any problem necessarily. It's when you reduce everything within what your scientific question is down to trivial things or things that are totally artificial. But I think there has been some increasing evidence. Kopacz has done some interesting studies, for example, that start looking at what are the elements of the therapeutic potentially therapeutic interaction that actually make a difference.
Yeah.
And I think with more of that, then I think people will realize that there's a real distinction. Because I remember a lot of people in the alternative medicine world long ago were basically saying science can't be used to study what we do. And I don't think that's true. But I understand why people think that way, given the way science has been applied.
Yeah. And I think I would say science can't study all of what we do. I think there is some truth to that, in a sense. But there also with comparative psychotherapy literature, a lot of that is really interesting because then it says there are these common variables or common factors or non-specific factors that when we compare several different types of psychotherapy and we're looking for the ingredient, what is the ingredient, the active ingredient of that psychotherapy, they find that for a large part of the effect is non-specific common factors. Relational effects, empathy, compassion, listening, developing a collaborative working relationship. So I think that's science that's kind of pointing to, but I think there's still may be an element that it's only pointing to. It's not that thing itself. At the Mayo Humanities and Medicine Symposium, one of the keynote speakers was Tian Watkins. Does that mean anything to people? So she was kind of a big, I don't know if it was kind of rap or R&B type of crossover, you know. A lot of people there knew who she was. I didn't know who she was, but I recognized some of her songs. But she had sickle cell anemia, multiple hospitalizations, accused of being a drug seeker many times. Then she developed brain cancer and had brain surgery. And she was talking about how great her doctor was and how long it took her to find a doctor. And one of the doctors in the audience said, can you give us, like, what did he say? What did he ask you? What did he do that helped you trust him and know he was the right doctor for you? And she kind of stumbled for a while. She was trying to think about it. And she said, it was just how I felt. It was who he was. And I felt that. And it's not something you say or something you do. It's something you are. It's something you feel. So to the extent that science can point to that, that's great. But I don't know that science will ever be able to get to that kind of quality of like what it is to feel this is a trustworthy person who's going to be there and I can go along. Yeah, Luke.
Just a few words on science is that Einstein said, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And also from the behavioral sciences that I know when I was trained as a qualitative researcher, it was not welcome in usual medicine. And qualitative research and combining it with quantitative research, you try to feel all the parts of the elephant to try to come to the whole. And then when people tell me in the past, like, well, you know, we've been doing acupuncture for thousands of years, but there's like not enough science. And I'm thinking, well, what happened in those 3,000 years? There's a lot of observation going on, a lot of passing on of scientific wisdom of what works, what doesn't. Are we crazy? And the modern science is a very new thing that we decided that a randomized controlled trial was going to be it. That was going to be the pinnacle of science. And I don't think so. There are many things we need to learn, and we need all different kinds of ways of doing our science, and not to just, you know, push aside what thousands of years of observation has taught us.
And I would say too, you know, my work with Joseph Rael, learning from a shaman and a mystic, he doesn't give me numbers. He doesn't teach me through numbers or studies or percentages. And so I think if we say, are we supposed to treat people well? Or should we be good people as physicians? If we have to appeal to science for that, I think that something, you know, is amiss. That I think that there are other realms that we can draw upon for certain dimensions of what we do as healers. Now as technicians, I think we can measure that. And science is very good for teaching us how to be better technicians. But we're also healers. If we're going to be good healthcare professionals, good doctors, we have to also draw on this aspect of healing, that it's these common factors, these non-specific variables, that are things that are difficult to quantify, but are very qualitative, that we can feel. So, some other comments or questions? Yes?
Thank you.
Thank you. So I hear your kind of call for this revolution to kind of humanize the providers. And I guess I'm just curious, and maybe it's the next part of your slide deck, of what does this look like from a systems perspective? Can we humanize medicine in the current medical system? And if we can't, do you have an idea of what that might look like?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm very familiar with Wayne Jonas and his kind of what he's doing within the VA. And if I remember correctly, at the last presentation I saw, he's spending an hour to an hour and a half with each patient. Phenomenal for those patients. But how do we do that on a population level so that everybody has access to this humanized medicine?
Yeah, thank you. So, like one of the things we're doing at the VA, at first we're teaching whole health. I'm sorry I didn't get into some of the whole health slides. At first we were teaching whole health thinking everybody has to do whole health. To a certain degree, I think that's true. Everyone should use whole health for themselves because it's a healing model, whole person, holistic healing model for the providers. The teaching has shifted a little bit now to think, well, maybe health coaches are the people who are going to do a lot of this work, who are going to be less costly and are going to have more time and not this pressure to be both technicians and kind of healers. So in a sense, we have a little bit of a bifurcation where some people will spend more of the quality time and some people will then hopefully read the notes and look at the personalized health plan that we develop in the VA, and then we'll be able to know that and use that in their work with patients as technicians. So that's one of the ways. It's a real dilemma. I mean, I've been in a lot of different settings. When I ran private practice, I basically always only booked one patient an hour. Sometimes it'd be a 15-minute med check because that's all they wanted. Sometimes it'd be a psychotherapy session. So I was able to create my own healthcare delivery system, and it worked there. But on a large scale, I don't know if every physician can necessarily spend that much time. In my current place where I work, in primary care mental health, we're really well resourced, and sometimes when I'm doing we call it MediStar, where it's we've got the psychologists, like Kelly, one of our psychologists here. There's Jenny, who's the triage nurse, and then the patient can go to one of the psychologists. And then if we have they need psychiatric evaluation, we've got walk-in psychiatric evaluation. I've got 2 30-minute slots. If I have only one patient in that time, I can spend 50 minutes with someone for their first visit at the VA and really do some of this other type of work. But I'm trained in that work. If I have the time, the opportunity, I can do it. But I think we need to train people so at least they know what that work is, so that they know that it exists, even if it's not a part of every interaction that they do. But then the challenge for the whole system is to try and support the providers as whole people, and then also to figure out different ways to support the clients as whole people. So it's a good question. Yeah. Nathan.
I was curious that we heard about your story and certain major events in your life. What was it that brought Joseph Rael in your life?
Oh, yeah.
How did you come to be here?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah. So that was one of those seeds, that got planted. So I found my medical school, a medical school and a residency personal statement that talked about I want to go and work with Native American cultures on an Indian reservation and learn about their spiritual approaches of healing, as well as, to be of service there. And so that sort of went underground for years and years. I read this book on him called The Visionary. It's by Kurt Wilt, who wrote a book on Joseph Rael. And I found that book, and then I emailed Kurt, and I said, hey, Kurt, this is cool. You're writing about Joseph. You're talking about how he's on a hero's journey. I'm doing hero's journey stuff with veterans far out. That's great. Thank you for your work. And he said, well, I think Joseph would be interested in what you're doing. And here's his email. I emailed Joseph, and I said, here's what I do. And Joseph said, well, I'm a shaman. People call me a shaman. I don't know. I just work here, And then he's like, well, why don't you come down and we'll talk? And I was like, sounds good. I'm in Seattle. And he's like, oh, I'm on the Southern Ute Reservation near Durango. I said, well, how long should I come down for? I said, well, 3 days would be good. Stay at this hotel. And I met him. And so I was thinking I'm going to write another chapter on indigenous healing methods for the hero's journey, to understand that and add that in as a component for people to draw upon. And so I write up my notes after the first day with Joseph, and I'm thinking, oh man, there's like a whole book in this, just these notes from this one day. And I go and see him the next day. I said, Joseph, it seems like there's a whole book here. He's like, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I've been working on it. So, you know, we've got like, we're on our third book. We're writing our third book, even though our second book hasn't got published yet, and we got ideas for like all these different books. And Joseph says, if you want something done, ask a busy person. And so I've been busy working. He says, work is worship. So that's his attitude. It's from the Tiwa, that work is worship. So whatever you do, put all of your heart into it. That's how it came to pass. And so within a relatively short time, all of a sudden, like I'm hanging out on an Indian reservation, you know, working with this healer, and it's like, it just felt so natural. But it was this thing that I really was interested in for years and years and had given up on. Other thoughts or questions? Where are you pointing over here? Oh, okay.
I have a loud voice, so.
Oh, but everybody might not hear you, so sure.
How do you grapple with the issue of colonization?
Yeah. It's a good question, and I didn't have enough time to really contextualize it as much as I might have here. You know, the issue of colonization, and like I don't teach. You know, I did a quick overview with the medicine wheel, but I don't really use the medicine wheel with people because I'm just, even though Joseph tells me to, and I wrote this whole book on it, I just feel like there's a risk with it of people misunderstanding it, and also a risk of me misunderstanding it, even though I'm learning it from him. And so one of the things I've done is to branch out into looking at healing circles and circle medicine. So the circle of the hero's journey, the circle of whole health. For those of you who haven't seen the whole health circle, there it is. So this is another circular model. And so I started to really realize all these holistic models are circular. And so I'll tend to draw on this. Sometimes I'll tell Native American veterans, I'll say, you know, we got this circle here. You might think it's a little bit like the medicine wheel, and you know, I don't mean disrespect or anything, but I think of this kind of like a VA medicine wheel. You know, we've got a north and a south and east and a west, and we've got the spirit and the body and the emotions and relationships, and you know, so maybe it's a little similar. It's taken us a while to catch on, but we're finally catching up to it. You know, so that's kind of how I use it. Is I try to contextualize it as an example of healing circles. But it's a good question. I've actually had people tell me that Joseph shouldn't be using the medicine wheel because it belongs to the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people, and Joseph's Southern Ute. Even though his mother taught it to him, and he's got a huge circle painted on his ceiling, and it's been like, you know, the formative spiritual visions that he's had revolve around it. But some people will say, you know, so much that that's not his, it doesn't belong to him. But he would argue, I think, and I kind of argue, healing circles are universal. You know, that particular cultural one is distinct in some ways, but also overlaps with some of the other healing circles. So, Lou?
I wanted to thank David for being here, giving such a wonderful presentation. Your questions have been wonderful. If you want to buy his books, he'll be signing them at the back table, and Donna can help you with that. They're just truly inspiring, wonderful work. And so thank you all for being here tonight. David will continue to be here if you have any other questions or any other questions you have about the Osher Center or any of that. We'll be here for a little bit longer. Thank you all for being our community, strong community for transformation, and we are all on the path. Thank you for being there for us. Thank you for being there for our communities, and thank you for coming tonight.